The exact second Diane Sterling tried to have my fishing boat impounded was the exact second she signed her own community's obituary. And I don't say that lightly. I say it because I was there, sitting in a dented aluminum skiff with lukewarm gas station coffee, watching fog lift off Mirror Lake like steam off a cast-iron skillet, when a 40-foot fiberglass monster came roaring out of the mist like it had something to prove. And if you've ever seen money try to intimidate water, you know how that usually ends. She stood at the bow like she owned the sunrise. White linen pants, oversized sunglasses, hair shellacked into submission. Perfume probably cost more than my outboard motor. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She pointed. "Is that your boat?" she yelled, voice sharp enough to cut rope. I tipped my hat, took a sip of coffee that tasted like regret, and said, "Depends who's asking." That was Diane Sterling, queen of the freshly built kingdom called Sterling Shores. A place where lawns were edged with surgical precision and houses looked like they'd been ordered off a luxury catalog. Just add Lakeview. My cabin, inherited from my grandpa Silas 6 months earlier, sat like a stubborn splinter on the North Shore, the last holdout from a time when folks brought coolers instead of caterers. My name's Elias Thorne, diesel mechanic by trade, grease under the nails, hands that know the exact sound an engine makes before it gives up. Grandpa Silas passed at 90, quiet as a dock line slipping into water, and left me that drafty little cabin. The place isn't impressive. Plank floors that sigh in winter, a porch that leans like it's listening, a creek kids used to sneak through to swim when their parents weren't looking. But it breathes. It remembers. For decades, working folks came here on Saturdays. Bad fishing jokes, cheap beer, sunburns, and stories that got better every year. Then the developers showed up, bought shoreline like inventory, and built houses so polished you could see the mortgage reflected in the windows. And Diane appointed herself guardian of aesthetic integrity. She came to my dock 3 days after that sunrise showdown, clipboard in hand, smile practiced in a mirror. "Mr. Thorne," she said, syrup thick enough to drown in, "your vessel violates community standards. It's visually disruptive." "Ma'am," I said, looking at my scratched-up boat. "It's a boat." She slid a cream-colored letter across my dock. "Cease and desist. 48 hours to remove the eyesore, or face impoundment at my expense." Property values, community investment, forward momentum. Words like bricks stacked neatly. Then she leaned closer and said, "History doesn't pay assessments." And that's when I understood this wasn't about aluminum and chip paint. It was about memory, about whether money gets to erase it. Things shifted fast after that. Neighbors I'd known since high school stopped making eye contact in the grocery aisle. Anonymous notes appeared under my door. Polite threats dressed as suggestions. Sterling Shores hired private security on jet skis who buzzed local fishermen like hornets. A drone hovered over my yard while I chopped wood, blinking red like it was judging my form. For a minute, I won't lie, I considered selling. Developers called weekly, numbers big enough to turn stubborn into stupid. But Grandpa Silas didn't raise me to fold because someone waved a checkbook. So I went where bullies don't like to go, the county courthouse library. Blackwood County Courthouse smells like floor wax and time. The kind of place where paperwork grows old with dignity. That's where I met Mrs. Gable. Clerk since before filing cabinets went digital, glasses hanging off her nose like they'd retired but hadn't left yet. "What are you really looking for, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, eyes sharp. "Truth," I said, "and maybe a loophole." She smiled like someone who knows secrets for a living. We dug through plat maps from the 1950s, brittle as pie crust, traced shoreline boundaries with her knotted finger. Found language about water rights, so vague it looked written after 2 martinis. Then we found something odd, a notation referencing Department of the Interior involvement in 1960s. Marked restricted. Mrs. Gable tapped it twice. "You didn't get this from me." That was the moment the fight stopped being personal and started being interesting. While Diane escalated, slashed my truck tires one morning, filed noise complaints about birds that weren't mine, greased local officials to expedite nuisance filings, I dug deeper. Called Maya Lynn, an environmental lawyer who hates bullies the way some folks hate rattlesnakes. She read the clauses, went quiet for a long minute, then laughed, slow and dangerous. "Oh, Elias," she said, "they built a palace on quicksand." Turns out in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Mirror Lake was designated a federal strategic water reserve. The Department of the Interior retained ownership of the lake bed and shoreline up to the high water mark, a federal easement, top to bottom. Every dock, every boathouse, every perfectly manicured lawn stretching to the water in Sterling Shores, built on federal land. And then came the twist. Buried in the documentation was the appointment of a federal civilian caretaker assigned to monitor the reserve, position never formally abolished. Name on the file? William Silas Thorne. My grandpa wasn't just stubborn, he was a federal steward. And the clause? It included hereditary continuity for uninterrupted monitoring. I wasn't squatting. I was, by dusty, bureaucratic definition, the acting federal custodian of Mirror Lake. Diane hadn't tried to remove a nuisance. She'd interfered with a federal officer. That's not HOA territory. That's felony territory. We staged the reveal at Diane's monthly town hall, the kind she ran like a coronation. Lawyers lined up, projector humming, catered coffee in the back. She stood at the podium, radiant and rehearsed. Then Director Evelyn Vance from the Department of the Interior stepped forward, quiet woman, steel in her spine. "Mrs. Sterling," she said evenly, "we need to discuss federal property." The room went silent enough to hear someone's phone vibrate. We rolled out 1,962 maps, red federal boundaries slicing across living rooms, patios, and yes, Diane's prize yacht dock. She sputtered about jurisdiction. Her lawyers looked pale. And then her husband, Arthur Sterling, soft-spoken, usually invisible, stood up, voice trembling. "I found those documents years ago," he said. "Diane told me to bury them." You could feel the air leave the room. Betrayal is sharper than any cross-examination. Diane was handcuffed not for aesthetic tyranny, but for attempted bribery of officials, harassment of a federal officer, and falsifying development permits. Her yacht was seized. Fences came down. In Sterling Shores, that pristine kingdom had to renegotiate its existence. Cleanup wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, compromise, and humility. Residents were offered long-term leases under the Mirror Lake Public Trust, provided they restored public access and paid into conservation funds. Some grumbled. Some apologized. My cabin, that leaning, breathing relic, became headquarters for the new public trust. I'm officially caretaker now. I teach kids to bait hooks, tell them not to lie about the size of the one that got away. We rebuilt docks to code, opened the shoreline back up. Last week, at sunset, I watched a family fish off the pier that used to be locked behind Sterling Shores Iron Gate. A little girl caught a bluegill and screamed like she'd won the lottery. Her dad laughed so hard he almost fell in. That laugh, that small, feral joy, that was justice. Not the cuffs, not the headlines. That laugh. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Power's often just confidence backed by paperwork nobody double-checks. It's loud. It's polished. It smells expensive. But truth? Truth is slow. It creaks like an old dock. It doesn't sparkle, but it outlasts. You don't have to shout to stand your ground. You just have to keep opening the right drawers. Keep reading the fine print. Keep remembering. Because sometimes the quietest people are carrying the heaviest truths. So who owns the horizon? The ones who can afford the view, or the ones who remember why the view was there in the first place. When does protecting what's yours turn into protecting what belongs to everyone? I'm Elias Thorne, and my boat's staying right where it is.